Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hi, welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We are in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. And I am your host, Pavini Moray. And today I am super excited to introduce you to Christina Pratt. Christina is a shamanic healer, an author, and teacher of exceptional clarity, humor, and practicality. Her mission is to draw deeply on the foundational wisdom of the ancients to rise up with innovation and creativity to meet the challenges of our times. She believes that it is only as emotionally mature spiritual adults that we will allow that which has true meaning and purpose to motivate inspired, passionate action that creates a world we are honored to hand down to our children and the coming generations. And she is committed to teaching the skills to do this. Christina is the founder of Last Mask Center for Shamanic Healing, opening in 1990 in New York City, and now a resident in Portland, Oregon. At the center, she offers classes in contemporary life skills, shamanic healing for individuals, families, and communities, using traditional shamanic healing forms like soul retrieval and psychopomp. She is pioneering new shamanic techniques to deal with the illnesses of our time, and her current focus is in the initiation of our young into spiritual adults and healing of our ancestral lines to release the growing burden on the living and the unresolved energies of the dead. She is the founder of Last Mask Community, a global community of students committed to living and teaching the cycle of transformation to the next generations. And she also has her own radio show, and she hosts international show Why Shamanism Now, and there are over 400 hours of free podcasts on the practical application of shamanism in our time, including some of the things that we're talking about today. So I really encourage you to check out more about Christina's work, and you can do that at lastmaskcenter.org. And you can also listen to her vast archive of weekly shamanism-focused internet radio shows at whyshamanismnow.com. And just before we dive in today, I want to give you a heads up about today's show, which is that we are delving into the spiritual side of sexual abuse and healing. And we're going to be talking about sexo-spiritual predation. The topic is obviously quite important, definitely something I've worked on in my own healing of my ancestral lineages. But it's also kind of an intense topic. So please listen with care, make sure you're staying super well, and definitely reach out for support if you need it. Hi, Christina. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, it's such a delight and a treat for me to get to speak to you. I've listened to numerous of your shows, so it's wonderful to have the chance to have you here. I'm just wondering if you would say a little bit more about the context of your work with shamanism and kind of how you come to this conversation.
So it was just really different when I came to shamanism than it is today. You know, we didn't have email. People didn't have personal computers at that time. There wasn't a lot of access to information about shamans or shamanism. So it wasn't in the collective awareness the way it is now. And I was just trying to figure out why I was here, like in this body at this time on the planet, and to do something useful with my life. And I was just navigating that the best that I could with help from people, but it's not like it was very well organized. And I was not really fully an adult yet from a spiritual perspective, even though I had aged into that category. And one thing led to another when I was in New York dancing, and I ended up having this profound experience, which could be perceived of as traumatic. It was a break with reality that persisted for several days. But as I came through that experience, I didn't know what had happened to me, but I understood that I was fundamentally changed by it, and that it would probably be the single most important thing that would ever happen to me in my whole life. And so whatever it was, I had to go with it, you know, and not knowing what that meant. And I talked to everybody I could reach out to, and I really didn't get very good help at the time. So it took a lot of years learning about things to understand that this had been an initiatory experience. But back to the shamanism piece. So this thing happened, and I didn't understand it at the time as a shamanic thing, just this profoundly life-changing thing. And, you know, we talk about change and transformation. This was quantum levels above any other profound transformative experience that I've had prior to and since. Anyway, at that time, things came into my, field of awareness, and they were at that time extremely clear if this was a message for me to pay attention to. And at that time, an article about soul retrieval as a practice came across my path, and it became very clear that I needed to do that, which is a very backwards way to sort of get into shamanism. And so because I knew I needed to do soul retrieval work, whatever that meant, then I went, they said, so now you need to learn how to journey. So I learned how to journey, which then had the side effect of connecting me with my helping spirits. And so now I had helping spirits I could go ask questions to. So now I could find out, why am I here in this life? What am I doing in New York? Why am I dancing? What's the soul retrieval thing? All of a sudden I had these go-to beings to ask what was going on in my life. And so for me, it always seemed profoundly practical to just have these helping spirits that were here to help. And so I just naturally had this very grounded, practical orientation with the idea of having helping spirits. And I need to learn to do this thing called soul retrieval. I don't really know what that means. And I need to have a purpose in life. And, all of this stuff just kind of came together in a very messy, chaotic way at that time. But the more I pursued things we would now call a shamanic path, because I wasn't intentionally pursuing a shamanic path, I was pursuing dancing. But as I did these shamanic things, they facilitated my ability to be present in the dancing, which really mattered to me at the time. And the more I did the shamanic things to be a better dancer, the more the shamanic things really grew in my life. And eventually I got to a place where I had to face the very obvious signs in my life that I was being course corrected and that I was being turned by my desire to find my purpose in life. I was being moved away from dancing into this thing called shamanism, which at that time was not a welcome piece of information. And so I came into it very reluctantly. And at the same time, I couldn't turn away from the fact that when I was working shamanically with clients doing soul retrieval work, I was the best version of myself I'd ever experienced. And I personally wanted to be able to enjoy being that person all the time. And so it created for me a personal reason to delve into this path, because I could honestly see that the person I was doing the work was just a better version of me. And it's a very convoluted way of getting into shamanism, but I honestly have never said to myself, I want to be a shaman, or I'm called to be a shaman, or this is, it's just, I don't understand when people say, I'm called to be a shaman, Christina, how do I do that? Will you train me? It's like, I don't get that. Because all I really wanted was to do my purpose in the world. And honestly, I think that's all any of us want, is to do what it is that we've come here to do in a good way and to help other people, hopefully, in that process.
Yeah, I love that. I think that you're right about being on purpose, right? Of how good it feels in our hearts and in our spirits and our bodies when we are on purpose. And, today's show is really talking about what I would say is being off purpose. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Children's Bureau says that, 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys is a victim of childhood sexual abuse. and that 20% of adult females and 5 to 10% of adult males recall a childhood sexual assault or sexual abuse incident. So this is profound. This is a profound unwellness, right? That our culture is dealing with. And, right before we started recording, you said something, and I would love to actually have you repeat that, about like why we even have to have this conversation. And then if you would talk a little bit about sexual abuse from a shamanic perspective, like kind of what is it? What does it mean? Why does it happen? All that kind of stuff. That would be great.
Yeah. So one thing that just to be responsible, I try to be responsible. I have to say that the shamanic work that I practice is not an appropriation of a different culture's shamanic work. Soul retrieval as a healing form exists in many, many shamanic cultures around the world. It doesn't belong to any one culture. It's a function. It's a healing function, just like cleansing or blessing, praying. These are things that people have learned to do. And so the shamanic healing that I do is non-traditional. It's authentic in that it's moved by spirit, and it calls on these ancient traditions in these functional forms, but it doesn't take the form, the way that other cultures do it. So that's one thing, just to put my own practice, my own healing practice, and my own teachings in that context. I'm not presuming to be a Peruvian shaman or a Zulu shaman or anything like that. I'm just me trying to do this as a contemporary woman with my people. And we are not shamanic people. I mean, we are in our bones, but in our experience, we are not we are not called into life through a held gate at birth by people that know our name and know our purpose in the world and are dedicated to our ability to do that. We are not initiated from childhood into adulthood when we would be given that true spirit name and expected to bring those gifts now in their full manifestation to the world. And of course, this would be happening when we're teenagers, right? And then we are living in a community that is helping us to understand how to be a good human and holding clear standards for what it means to be a good human and an adult in the world, and what that responsibility is to wield that power, both ordinary reality and non-ordinary reality. And then we would be honored in the gateway movement into our eldership in our life, and we would be tended at death. And so all these things define shamanism and shamanic cultures. So that's not us, because we don't do those things anymore culturally. Our culture is sick in those 5 ways. And those 5 shamanic sicknesses lead to all of the other sicknesses that we experience in our contemporary Western culture. So that's a big show right there. So if we look at this then and talk about sexuality or any of these concepts around sex relative to shamanism, we are talking about shamanism as a global human experience, not as a particular people's expression of shamanism. So that's one thing. But we also have to talk about it with the understanding that we don't live the way shamanic people did. And I don't mean just the hunting-gathering piece of it. I mean psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. We are woefully undeveloped. That shamanic cultures had profound emotional, psychological, spiritual technologies in their understanding of what an adult human being needs to do to be in the world in a good way and bring their gifts. And so sexuality in different shamanic cultures is defined differently. But the consistent thread through shamanic cultures around the globe is a profound respect for sexual experience in life and very clear boundaries for what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And There are some very particular exceptions that I could get into around this particular thing I'm going to say here, but generally speaking, an adult would not be allowed to abuse a child a second time. That the culture, the elders, the leaders, the adults in that culture would end that experience and deal with the adult. The amount of predation on children and sexual harassment and abuse in general among these supposed adults is not acceptable in a shamanic culture. And so they don't necessarily have the kind of conversation we need to have now, because we do have those horrifying statistics that are our lived reality, our shared reality. And so when we, today, in talking about this topic from a shamanic perspective, we're actually engaging now in creating new medicine. In how do we use shamanic practices and functions and skills to address a problem in our time, which shamanic people would not have been foolish enough to let happen. And certainly not, not that it didn't, as individual events occasionally happen. It's humans. But as a practice, as a way of living handed down through families and generations, as big secrets carried by the people? No. So, an example if, there's so many. Let's just take the Inuit people, which would be people around the Arctic Circle, particularly here in North America, Alaska, this area. Okay. Well, back when they lived in the cold times, of course, we're changing their life now with our environmental issues. But anyway, historically speaking, they're living in the ice, and they're not growing crops, right? They're hunting animals. And when they would lose animals, the shaman would do a big journey into Sedna, who is the mistress of the beasts, who are mostly sea beasts, sea animals. And the shaman would journey down to the depths of the oceans in the lower world to talk with Sedna and to find out, well, mostly to placate her and to find out why is she withholding the animals from the people. Now, the reason was always the same fundamentally, which is you guys don't deserve them. You human beings are not behaving in a way that warrants me giving you my children to eat. So think about that. So basically, the human beings are living in a way that their literal survival, whether or not they have food, depends on their behavior relative to each other, themselves, and the spirit world. So if these people had been abusing their children and sexually harassing their whoever's as they get older than children, they wouldn't have gotten food. Period. This is the true traditional shamanic life. So what does that look like for us today? So anyway, basically, to finish the story of Sedna and the people, Sedna would painstakingly go through all of the trespasses of all of the people in the community. And the shaman's job would be to come back and to share Sedna's story and basically out all the secrets. All the secrets, all the trespasses, all the abuses, all of the things that the people needed to come clean with and repair their relationships with each other, with the environment, with their ancestors, with the children, with the spirit world. And then, if they could set things right and bring their relationships back into balance, then the animals would come and the hunting would be good and the people would have food. And so this is the piece, contemporary people look at shamanic cultures as if they were somehow primitive. Relative to our topic today, we're barbaric. They had it wired. They had it totally figured out. They understood it is the quality of all of our relationships, all of the time, that defines our right to be here and consume the beautiful resources of this web of life. And it is my gift or my purpose that I give back to keep that in balance. And that there is no entitlement. And that every being is a sovereign being. And not only that, how they define their life, their sexuality, how they present in the world is between that person and their spirit and their calling. And that it will be supported by the culture regardless of what it is. It's not ours to say what a person should look like or how they should call themselves or what they do in that sense, as long as they do what they do within the structure of good relationship with each other. So it's just a whole different world. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit off in left field around that question, but I don't think contemporary people really conceive of what a shamanic culture was. It's so new agey and fluffy, and it frustrates me because I really am, in my own humble way, wanting to help contemporary people, myself included in that, find a bridge back to a way of living that we are truly in good relationship. And so if we're going to be in good relationship with our ancestors, for example, we have to then get our ancestors in good relationship. It's such a mess. Anyway, so shamanism from a sexuality from a contemporary shamanic perspective would be, first, understanding as individuals our own innate sovereignty and treating everyone from that perspective. So that's a whole big kettle of fish right there. And then from that, we can then start talking about life force and how our life force is getting expressed as sovereign beings. One expression of that would be sexuality. Now, from a shamanic perspective, our expression of our sexuality could evolve and shapeshift over a long life. So that's a whole nother part of the conversation right there. But within that sexuality, then, that we're looking at the expression of our life force that is now shifted into sexual energy, how it is expressing in our physical world, physical life, how it is expressing through our emotional wisdom and our emotional body, how it expresses through our mental body, our mental wisdom body, and how our sexual energy is actually expressing through our spiritual body. And that from a healthy perspective, we would be tending an authentic expression of our sexual self throughout our whole being in that way, through all four aspects of ourself. What that also means then is our sexual energy could potentially be violated or wounded or shut down or judged, or all of the many things that create distortion, as you were saying, distortion from our path, our purpose. Physically, it can happen emotionally, it can happen mentally, it can happen spiritually. In the sense of woundedness, any of those aspects of who we are could experience a level of trauma that could move us into soul loss, which moves us into a kind of stuck place around the trauma. And so a shamanic expression or definition of a human being's sexual energy, it's not just about the diversity of how we present, but that the diverse expression of sexual energy itself through our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual aspects of ourselves. So it's big and blossoming and boisterous, and when it's healthy, it's has a very deep, soulful, and playful, creative, joyful, shared experience. In my experience with shamanic communities that are still relatively coherent, which is changing as well. But anyway. So another example would be in Amazon culture, so in a place where it's warm and people are, it doesn't take a whole lot of work to get your food for your life. There is a fair amount of what we would somewhat condescendingly call sexual play. And personally, it's just sexual expression. And with a very clear line drawn for young people experiencing sexual expression and adults, that the activities that would create a child are forbidden until you spiritually prove that you two people are worthy spiritually of bringing another child into the world. And until that time, you can do all the other sexual stuff, but that's off limits. So it's just and these are people who live in a very fragile environment, right? So you can't overpopulate a rainforest or you destroy it immediately. So it is interesting how shamanic people's relationship with sexuality has a deep, nourishing, soulful place, and a playful, expressive, joyful, shared, big, boisterous place, but also very clear parameters around when sexual expression turns into responsibility towards children. And so now we circle back to those horrific statistics and realize why it is that, shamanic cultures don't have practices for healing child abuse, because they, for the large part, didn't have it. That protecting the children was one of the highest shared responsibilities in a culture, and the preservation of an adult's life who was an abuser was far less important than the child and the gifts that they might bring. So it's a very different way of understanding what really matters in life. Healthy sexual expression matters, but preserving and tending the life of the child and their ability to move into their purpose and initiating them into it is one of the highest values beyond basic everyday survival.
I wonder if anyone who's listening to this is experiencing a sense of relief in their body. That's what I'm experiencing. That my breath is coming a little bit deeper, of like, oh, right. Like, I know that this is true. I know that in my bones, this is the way that we do this, right? That we can focalize and direct and make choice about the expression of our sexual energy in ways that are in alignment with all of life, right? That are in alignment with goodness and support for our descendants. And I feel like we all know that. We know that this is the way. This is, that what's happening right now is not the way. That anytime that power over in non-consensual ways is used in the expression of our life force, it's not good. This is not taking us in the direction that we need to be going. I'm curious if you would, first of all, I just want to say thank you for that, the gift of that framing of the knowing that we already have in our bodies, and now there's language for it. So thank you for that.
Well, and these people are our ancestors, so it's even in our ancestry.
Even in our ancestry,
yeah,
we know this to be true. Like,
yeah,
we come from, a deep well of sexual goodness. Like, we are here because of that, right?
And we've been that longer than we've been messed up.
Right.
So it's important to remember that.
I'm curious if you'd speak a little bit about, because it's my sense that there's also other than human things that can that get attached. Like, I'm not so clear on the cosmology of this, and I'm really hoping that you will help illuminate it. But that there's people who make choices about the way they're using their sexual power over others or with others, and sometimes those choices are have devastating consequences, right? And it's also my understanding that there are energies that maybe don't have bodies that feed on these kinds of sexual predations, sexual violation. And I'm just curious of what you'd say about that. Like, what are these other things that are other than human that can lead to, it's like almost like not coerce, that's not the right word, but like tempt someone into making the choices of violating their own sovereignty and someone else's sovereignty?
There's like so many avenues to come into this. I'm going, which path do we get? So I'm going to talk about kind of two aspects of this, see if I can make this make sense. So on one hand, I do want to acknowledge that in this ancient past that we're talking about, when people were healthy about energies, there was a possibility that a teacher would transmit wisdom via the intimacy of intercourse. So that exists in that story, let's say, that path exists in our ancestry as well. But it exists in the context of that culture that I was describing. And so I think it's important for people today, because there's a version of sexual abuse that we haven't really talked about yet, but that is what happens between spiritual teachers and students. And so the problem is that that story exists in our past, but I don't actually believe that that story can exist outside of the culture that can hold it in a good way. And we're not that culture anymore. So I'd really strongly encourage people to not look at their spiritual teachers as someone who is capable of transmitting some profound spiritual wisdom via sex. It's just not happening these days. So I want to just bring that piece in, because that is a piece of these ancient cultures that we were can be in some ancient cultures we're talking about. What is more true is what you're getting at today, which is the fact that sexual energy, as any other power, is used inappropriately, is used in a power over place, is used as a means to violate or coerce or manipulate or control by people. Okay. So the other piece then is to understand that we are not the only things here, that there's a whole world of invisible energies that are part of the web of life here on Earth. Some are a natural outflowing of life here on Earth. For example, there is literal water here. There's also water spirits. There are literal mountains here. The mountains have mountain spirits. And there's humans here, and humans have human spirits. Okay. So in that, there are also energies that feed on different kinds of energies that humans produce. Sometimes that feeding is more symbiotic when we're talking about some high energetic states, where you're working with you're connected to a high spirit vibration that's kind of egging you on and you're egging it on, and then the energy is basically rising and it ends up being mutually beneficial. That is a possibility. But what you're talking about is more of the energies that are wanting to be symbiotic with us, that are feeding off the residue of our unhealthy states, our suffering, our unprotected, unintentionally available sexual energy, our unintentionally available mental or heart energy, or different emotional states. Like certain drugs, for example, put people into certain emotional states as part of the high, whatever the people are seeking, and certain energies feed off human beings in that emotional state. And so those beings tend to hang around people that use those drugs. So if parents are using those drugs around children who are vulnerable, now all of a sudden children who don't have a clue, because of the nature of development in childhood, the distinction between the physical world and the energetic world yet, they're brought into relationship with energies that, by the very definition of their beingness, is they feed off humans. And so it's profoundly irresponsible for adults who are in the care of children to do any activities that would bring energies into the home environment, across the threshold, basically, into the home environment, and that would put the children at risk spiritually. So, so it compounds that sense of the responsibility the adults should be taking around children, which is not only through your own actions to protect their sovereignty and their own power and their own sense of self, but to protect them from energies that would come in from the invisible world that feed on, I don't know, the energies that we generate. So this can turn into Hollywood really fast and really bad versions of this story. So let me back up a step and then go forward a little bit differently around this, which is what we don't understand as contemporary people, in part because there's so much abuse of power around us and we feel so diminished by it. We don't understand the profound power of the human heart. And that the more I do shamanic work, the more I realize that the bottom line of all of this is that there are other energies in the world trying to get at that which we take totally for granted, which is the profound transformative power of a human heart. And, you know, there are few hearts more pure and powerful than a human child. And thus, you know, no energy that looks more delectable from these things that would want to get at that amazing energy, you know, than these things that would prey on the hearts, really, of humans. And that for all of the confusion in our contemporary world, our sensuality and our sexuality and our heart energy are very, very connected. I mean, our hands and our face and our heart evolve out of the same cells in every human being, in the fetus, and that these cells are all about this deep capacity for connection, be it through sensuality, be it through sexuality, be it through our heart and our emotions, our face, our hands, touching, tasting. It's so profound. It's such a profoundly perfect setup for ecstasy, and every human being has it. And there's a whole lot of things. And when you think about it that way, you go, oh, yeah, well, it kind of makes sense that there's a whole lot of other energies that don't have bodies that would like to get at that ecstasy, too. It's just amazing. So part of being a human is not getting caught up in Hollywood stories about the bad guys and the good guys, but more diving into the understanding that I carry a human heart in this world. And it is my job to do that in a good way, to radiate the beauty of that heart and not be a leaky container. And to understand and to teach our children how to be grounded and how to have energetic boundaries so they can carry that heart in the world in a way that they will be safe and able to recover and respond when challenges to that sovereignty happen in the world. So one of what I consider the misuse of stories is when we get too caught up in the story of the nature of a particular abuse and we repeat that, be it with a human or an energy, non-embodied energy, since humans are energy too. Anyway, that we repeat that story, it's almost like praying with prayer beads to repeat that story again and again. And so instead, what I'd like us to consider is more that sense of, it's my responsibility as a human to carry this amazing human heart into the world as a sovereign being. And that my sensuality and sexuality and my gifts, my purpose, these are all expressions of that energy. And so I need to understand that energies that prey on humans are, for the most part, lazy and opportunistic. They're really not like these creepy Hollywood predators that are just voracious in their appetite. They actually tend to be pretty lazy and opportunistic because they really don't have the ability to override the free will of a human being. It's a very powerful thing. It's the thing that goes hand in hand with the amazing capacity of the human heart is your free will. But a child who's violated is not being given then the right information about their free will and their right to say no. But invisible energies have to follow the rules. Unlike humans that have free will to override the rules, invisible energies can't. And so this is one of the things to teach our children, is that these energies do exist. And you need to say no. And you need to not be lazy about your energy and have, sometimes I'm going to bother to have a boundary, sometimes I'm not. Lazy about it, or opportunistic, which is leaving holes. So that's the first thing about looking at this shamanically and understanding the predation from invisible beings, is if I am not offering opportunity by having holes in my energy field, and I am not being lazy about my energy and my disciplines, then that energy that would assume to be a predator towards me is not going to succeed. They're going to bounce off me and go to somebody who is giving them better opportunity. So, that's what we need to understand as adults. The issue is then children, because children, part of the nature of childhood is a child can't be expected to understand how to enforce their free will. As adults, we're supposed to be teaching them that and helping them with our free will to protect them until they learn to protect themselves. And we're supposed to be teaching them to protect themselves. I mean, this is one of the things that never enters into the contemporary conversation. No human being is supposed to be safe going through the world for their entire life like a child, with taking no responsibility for their grounding, their boundaries, their energy hygiene, and whether they're aware about their energy in the world. That's not an ideal state. That's another aspect of that shamanic culture that I described, is that people are educated around their energy. And so that this never kind of comes into the contemporary conversation, is that we are, as adults, responsible for the energy that we present in the world, and not presenting a body filled with holes. And so that's why I feel like, I'm going to make this leap quickly. That's why I feel like it's really important for contemporary people to recognize shamanic healing is valid. Soul retrieval will help you fundamentally fill those holes. And if you have experienced trauma that is limiting your capacity in your life, you likely have experienced soul loss. And soul loss is easily repaired by a shamanic practitioner who knows how to do soul retrieval work and is a true initiated shamanic practitioner. So just to tighten that circle really quickly. So I'm talking about being responsible with your energy, but also I want to acknowledge that these kinds of traumas that we're talking about today, especially around sexual energy, because it's back to that place of the heart and the intimacy and the sensuality, that beautiful inner place, that it's important for us to understand that if we are, like today you would be diagnosed with PTSD. If PTSD has been accurately diagnosed, you are also in a state of soul loss. Soul parts can be retrieved really easily via shamanic practices, like in one session, easy. You then have to integrate it and work with it. But my point about all of this is the repair is easy if we can just get grounded about understanding the nature of the damage. And so back to what I was saying about story. So how this happened isn't as important as understanding what happened. So if soul loss happened, then you need a soul retrieval. If this is just kind of a wearing away of the energy, not actually soul loss, so a constant irritation, then we need to understand, why does my energy look available to that? How do I transform that? And if it's a child, we have to help the child to transform it. So that's the part of the challenge, if we're going to look at these things shamanically, is we're never off the hook for our own energy body. And that's not blaming the victim. It's just acknowledging the way energy works and taking some responsibility for that education. I'm not saying take responsibility for yourself. I mean, I am, but take responsibility for educating yourself as a person living in the world, for also being an energy person living in the world, and that we can become leaky buckets very easily, but those leaks can be repaired. And when we live in the world without those leaks, then everything changes around us. And then we also become the people who can start to show up to help other people repair their leaks, to go into our ancestral lines and help those ancestors who need our help because they're dead, so they can't change anything and they're in a really problematic place. So all of the possible fixes for this problem begin by us recognizing the energetic core of this conversation about predation from the invisible world, and which in many ways is the same as predation from the physical world. It's just you need to believe that it's real. It's easy to believe that the physical world is real, but people don't believe the invisible world is real. So the classic categories, for sexual predators in the invisible world are the incubi and the succubi, which are really just talking about a function, a particular movement of energy, the effort to insert energy or the effort to suck energy out. So again, the story of who, what, and how doesn't matter as much as recognizing what was trying to happen. Did it succeed in happening, and how do we repair that? I guess that's where I was trying to go with all that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I have been thinking a lot about fear and the role of fear in the body, and how, of course, any state, any set of sensations or emotions can become habituated, but that fear is really particular, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can give us really good access. And when you were speaking, I was thinking about how, as a small child, I was really afraid of the dark and the things that came in the dark, right? And as I think many children are, and parents reassure them, oh, that's just a bad dream. That's just your imagination. Like, boogeyman isn't real, ghosts aren't real. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I had a teacher who was like, oh no, demons are real.
Yeah,
real. And it was like, and it was such a relief, to have someone validate, like, oh yeah, that thing you were feeling that you were afraid of, that set of sensations in your body, that was real, and it was there for a reason. Like, those things that you were experiencing were real, and it's like, so it's like we're almost afraid to believe. We're afraid, we're afraid to believe in the unseen. But it's like, once we can just make that leap to be like, okay, yeah, I can kind of suspend my disbelief and be like, okay, I'm going to go along with this. If there's just relief there of like, okay, now I can actually do something about this issue. So it's almost like because what you're saying is that this whole retrieval or the fixing of the holes isn't the difficult part. It's the believing that there is something unseen that's happening that can be addressed, right?
And that it can be addressed, yeah.
Right, yeah. Because
if we can get over that hump.
Shame and shadowy bits around, like, I'm the one who's broken, I'm the one who's this is somehow me. I am carrying, and I've started thinking about it as like being haunted, like not like a haunted house, but like carrying ghosts in your body. And this is what I think of as transgenerational trauma, because I think that these energies, everybody's got to eat, right? Whether you're a dog or a human or a ghosty type thing, you've got to eat. And so they can absolutely get passed down generationally, right? And they can get passed down generationally through these things, like through violation, through addiction, through silence. Like, that there's this, there's trauma, but there's also the unseen piece of trauma, right? Trauma is like the muscular part there, the part that's held in the body and the fascia, but then there's this energetic piece that you're talking about.
Right, and how to think about your experience of life. Yeah. Training you to have,
I'm curious of, like, because it's hard to see when it's just your normal, right? When you're just like, oh, especially if you've experienced sexual violation as a very young child, right? And you've been living with these energies and they've been feeding off of you for 20, 30, 40 years. Like, how do you even start to notice, oh, wait, this isn't all me, and there's something other that's happening here. Like, you know what I mean? If it's just your normal, how do you know to get support around it?
Yeah, the whole me, not me.
Yeah.
Understanding what's me and not me is an important thing for every single human being to figure out, and then you add a history of trauma and abuse to that, and it's even more complicated, what's me and not me. So this is one of the key piece to this, back to what you were saying, because I too have gotten to a place where I'm not really resonating with thinking about us as being sick and broken. Yeah, it's just not working for me anymore. Even though I have a vital healing practice, I think of it more that, frankly, shit happens to people, and it's bad, and stuff that's trying to develop goes dormant because it's not getting what it needs to develop. And that if we can just get the icky bits out and the right bits back in that really belong to the person, then these qualities will have what they need to develop. Okay, so that's my basic operational theory these days with shamanic work. So one of the things that we all have is innate wisdom in our body about protection. But it's like you said, we get these crazy stories from parents like, oh, no, there's nothing under the bed. It's like, no, there's something. Nope, honey, there's nothing under the bed. You're just making that up. And so we learn to distrust that system that is innate to us that says you're not safe right now. There's something under the bed. And maybe the thing under the bed is just your power animal, but you don't know yet, right? You don't know. Is it here to help me or is it here to harm me? And you're not being taught that those are two possibilities. There's skills to deal. We're not being taught any of that. We're just told it's not happening. And so it's shutting down and teaching us to disregard and disbelief our own internal natural instinct towards energetic clarity and a natural knowing that I am a sovereign being, my power is my own, and so I'm supposed to have boundaries here to know what's me and what's not me. And boundaries are not shielding. It's not something I have to lower to have an intimate relationship with someone. It's really about energetically how I move through the world. In other words, if all of my cells in my body suddenly decided to not have cell walls, little cell membranes, I'd die. Right? But all my cells, my liver cells, know to stay liver cells and have their little liver cell membranes, and my kidney cells, So their boundaries allow them to be what they are and to do what they're here to do. And that's the kind of understanding that we need to have about boundaries, specifically. And I forgot where I was going with all this.
I was asking you about, how would I know if this was happening to me?
Right. And so where I was going with this is this idea that we have these innate wisdoms that get overridden by parents that are frankly giving us wrong information, right? And a culture that's giving us wrong information. And on top of that, a culture that is giving us intentional misinformation. So, for example, intentional misinformation I was given, because I'm old, right? So I was told at about 13 years old at our first junior high dance, a big social event of our lifetime, right? We were told, all the girls were told, we did not have permission to tell any of these young boys no if they asked us to dance. So we were taught by our adults and our teachers that as young girls, we did not have the right or permission to say no. I mean, think about that. It's just, I go back to that and I think it's so horrific. So, of course, we spent the whole night being hideously groped by horrible little 13-year-old boys. So I look back at that and I just go, the levels of wrongness in that just echo. So the point is, we're not just given wrong, well-intended wrong information. We are also being shaped and guided by particular information that is coming from our culture's desire for power to flow in certain ways and to not flow in other ways. And so as contemporary people, we need to be really lucid about that and conscious about that and not naive and not continue to go through life without educating ourselves around that. Okay, but back to what I was saying, innate wisdom. We all have innate wisdom about the answer to your question. It's been really overridden. So an example would be when my niece was 5, she was really afraid to go to sleep in this room in my parents' home that had a lot of doors. It had a lot of closets, it had an extra room off, it had under the bed, it had a gajillion places for spooky energies, right? And she was really afraid to go to bed, so I went up with her one night to put her to bed, and she was telling me about these energies, and I was going, well, have you seen them yet? What are they? How do you feel? I was trying to get some information from her, and she was just like, well, I don't want to talk about it. I said, okay. I said, well, if you could do anything, what would you want to do so you could sleep? And she just suddenly pulled off this totally kung fu, chi, energetic, Jet Li move, like in the middle of the room, that just totally cleared the space, pumping chi out of her little lao gong in the center of her hand. And I was like, holy crap, where did that come from? Right? It was real. I mean, it was a real qigong move. It was real, how do I claim this space? I am the only person here with a body. I'm the only 3D person here, in other words. This is a 3D space, and it's mine. That's what she did in that movement, in that one movement. Cleared the space, never bothered her again. Just because someone asked her to just go with what's your instinct here? What would you like to be able to do? It was amazing. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And it's one of the things that started me thinking, oh, wait a minute, we already know all this. It's just no one's asking us the right questions. So, my point in that is that as adults, since most of us are adults trying to figure this out, that we can accept what is in the moment and then choose to go into our energetic inner core where all of this wisdom lives and begin to cultivate this inner life connected to our inner wisdom and ask it these questions and give it the permission through a practice, an energy practice of coming out of this dormancy and beginning to develop. And where we're stuck in the dormancy, we then would need to reach out for some kind of help or healing outside of what we're able to do ourselves. But I believe that the first part of the answer to the question from a shamanic perspective is that I trust as an article of fact. I just trust this. I have faith in the fact that my body already knows the answers to all of this. Deeper in the code and the DNA than the actual lived experience in this particular life. That I have this deeper in my body. I just need to give it permission. So what would I have wanted to do? What would I have wanted to have been able to do? Because as an adult, you're actually likely to be able to do that now in your own inner energetic world. And that's important for us to understand, is that nothing other than soul parts, actually nothing's been taken from us. Things have been hidden to keep them safe. Things have been dormant because they didn't have the energy they needed to flourish. I mean, things have happened. But it's not the dire experience that it feels like. Because what we don't understand, because we don't really embrace soul loss, what we don't understand is that soul loss carries with it a profound hopelessness and despair that can be immediately turned around when the parts are brought back. And the problem with that hopelessness and despair is it tends to descend on everything like weather. And so we don't actually realize we do have these innate wisdoms within ourselves. So I know for me, what I did, because I had an amazing teacher, is she taught us all, but myself, to go into that innate wisdom and to begin to give it life again. To trust that it was there, to just take it as a hypothesis. And her teachings were around energy, just around grounding, boundaries, my own internal landscape, and my right to claim it as my own, as I found it, and then to change anything I find that is not acceptable to me. And that I have a right to do that, and then over time can gain the skills to do that. But it begins with that understanding that we were born with it, and it's ours, and our access to it has been perhaps denied. But we just need to, it's kind of like a good, sci-fi movie. We just need to, go around the keypad and access it again. It's all about that distortion of information and recognizing your access to your innate wisdom got distorted, not the innate wisdom itself. Your access to your true calling got distorted, not the calling itself. Your access to your feeling that you have the right to be exactly who you are fully and boldly in the world, your access to that got distorted, not the blueprint for what that is. And that, when we start to understand, I just have to get around this and get into what exists and begin to cultivate a new relationship with this energy that is within me, then that innate wisdom and the me who's choosing, the free will person, can notice what's here and what isn't. What isn't, I can go ask for help to get back, and I can put myself back together again. I won't have opportunity anymore in my energy because I've taken charge of that. So I become less easy for energies to, and interesting for energies to prey on. So anyway, for me, that is the key piece, is not just, like you said, the leap to understanding, the invisible world is real, there are energies there, this stuff does happen, but, I have the right to make and define my own energy, and that I actually have that responsibility, and that the information is encoded in my living, breathing being. And teachers help because they give us practices, they give us questions to ask, they help us move that process along. But ultimately, you could be by yourself and listen to your body and become re-educated, because it's all there in the innate spirit wisdom of our physical body, which is an amazing wise being that most of us have learned to not listen to for those exact same reasons you told, in those very common contemporary human stories where your parents said, don't believe in that. So you stopped. I stopped. We stop. It's all there waiting for us to come back and realize that stopping was a foolish idea. We need to go back to what exists.
Christina, thank you so much for all of this, and the giving it the shape and the language. Just personally, it feels invaluable, and I think it's going to be really supportive to those who listen to this podcast, that this is my house and I get to live here, and I get to take back the pieces that have gone, and I get to exit anything that I don't want in my house. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And again, I really want to direct people to your hundreds of hours of talk and wisdom. What a service that you've been doing for a decade, right? You've been doing this for about a decade.
Yeah, getting there.
Yeah, of weekly talks on this stuff with amazing folks from all over the world. So that the website you could find that on is whyshamanismnow.com. That's where you'll find Christina's archive. And then also, if you're interested in studying more with Christina or learning more with her, don't expect her to have sex with you. I'm hearing that very clearly. But you can find all that information on her website of thelastmaskcenter.org. And that's up in Portland, but also online. So thank you everyone for listening to this episode. And if you have felt inspired by what you've heard here, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and rate and review Bespoken Bones on iTunes. I'm also really interested in hearing, I've been hearing from folks, and I'd love to hear more from folks about how this podcast is affecting your life, like what you're learning, what's happening for you as you're considering these questions about ancestors and sexuality and trauma and healing, and also who you'd like to hear me interview. And you can use the contact form on my website, which is bespokenbones.com. You can be in touch. You can ask questions that you'd like to have answered on the show. You can learn more about the work that I offer there. I am Pavini Moray, and I will be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom. Thanks so much for listening.